being here.
How old are you three young ladies? How old are you?
I'm 13.
13.
I'm 11.
11.
I'm 13.
13, okay. So this story begins. I grew up in Boston, the city of Boston, Roslindale. And then when I was 11 years old, our family moved to Dedham. And I eventually went to Boston Public Schools, and I went to a little Catholic school in Brookline called St. Aidan's, which isn't around anymore. Hasn't been around for a long time. 7th and 8th grade. And then I went to Dedham High School. And at Dedham High School, one night, I was on the student senate. I was the vice president of my class. And one night, I volunteered to sell fudge for $1 a box. It was pretty bad fudge, I think. For $1 a box, you're not going to get anything really great. But of course, this is 60 years ago. So I wanted to do so with a friend of mine who was my classmate. And after we went to, we knocked on doors and sold fudge for the Dedham High School Student Council. We went back to her house, which was, 10 blocks away from our house, to count the money. And I don't know why it took us a long time to count the money, why we even had to go back. We probably only sold 40, 50 boxes of fudge. It was $50, 50 boxes times $1, $50. But we went back to our house, and I met that classmate's sister. She was 14, I was 16. She's now seated to my right. And we started dating, and 8 years later.
Against my mother's wishes.
Yeah, because I was older.
He was 2 years older, but a senior in high school, and I was a freshman, and my mother said, no. My sister, who went to high school with him, said, he's harmless. Little did she know. Never listened to him.
So, they called me a cradle robber because I was dating a freshman in high school. And then she went to BC, but by the time she went to BC, I was a senior at BC, and they called me a cradle robber for dating a freshman. Then, of course, I went into the Army, and then went into business and so on. But if you go back and remember the movie series from Francis Ford Coppola, The Godfather,
Yes.
he was interviewed one time on PBS radio, NPR, one or the other, and they asked him, how do you come up with the idea of a movie or a movie series like The Godfather? It was so successful, so powerful. He said, whenever I do anything, any project, I come down to one word. I focus on one word. It's like a great chef boiling things down to sort of the essence of flavors. And so the reporter said, what was the one word? And he said, succession. And that makes all the sense of the word. So how do you boil our story, my story down? And I think it comes down to maybe the idea that no is the beginning of the selling process. And you never fully understand success until you've experienced defeat. And so my dad was a semi-pro baseball player, and I was his only son. I was a terrible baseball player. In fact, I was so bad in athletics in high school that I kiddingly say the only letter I ever got in sports was from the coach saying, don't bother. So my father would have been, he never said this, but he would have been disappointed that I wasn't as good as he was. But then one day, when I was 37, I ran my first marathon. And when I was a kid, my dad used to take us to the marathon. There were, 100 spectators. There weren't thousands or millions of spectators, 100. And people ran by in their shoes. They didn't have running shoes back then. This is like in the 40s and 50s. He thought marathoners were like Greek gods. He just thought that was the best, highest of everything. So I ran up the top of Heartbreak Hill at mile 20. And there was my father. And he hugged me, I hugged him, and all was forgiven. I was now a hero. I was a Greek god. So I'll tell you a little bit about my life. I had aspirations of joining the Army and becoming an officer, or joining the Navy and becoming an officer of the Marine Corps, whatever. But my only sibling had 3 children, the oldest of whom was 5, and her husband left and never came back. So when I was 19, I had 3 kids. I wasn't married, but she couldn't work because she had 3 kids, the oldest being 5. So I had to cut all those plans short, and I decided that I would go in the Army for 6 months, and then 5.5 years in what they call the reserves. And then after the Army, I became a salesman for the Campbell Soup Company, in the frozen food division. I sold Pepperidge Farm turnovers and Swanson TV dinners. I wouldn't recommend any of these things. And the Campbell's frozen soup, and I did such a terrible job selling that, they stopped making it 50 years ago. And then a year later, I decided that I didn't want to be a food salesman calling on supermarkets. So I went to New York, and I started in the advertising business. And I went to work for one of the biggest advertising agencies, Batten, Durstein, and Osborne. Jack Benny, who was your parents will remember, was just a wonderful old comedian. He used to say that Batten, Durstein, and Osborne sounded like a piece of luggage falling down the stairs. And I had the most junior job on the biggest account at the agency, Chrysler Corporation. My job was to call on car dealers, Dodge car dealers, and in New York, Western Connecticut, Westchester County, New York City, and northern New Jersey, and do whatever it took to make them happy. And the first assignment I got at the end of the first week on the job in 1965, maybe 60, almost 60 years ago, was 56 years ago, was to get some car dealer 4 tickets to a New York Jets game. First of all, I knew what the Boston Patriots were. They went to the New England Patriots, they were Boston. I had no idea who the New York Jets were, but there was a guy that was their quarterback, very colorful, Broadway Joe Namath. And so I didn't know anyone in New York. I didn't know how to get tickets. I'd never been to a Jets game. But I knew that my job was to get 4 tickets. And I got 4 tickets. I have no idea how I got them, I don't recall. I guarantee you those tickets were among the worst tickets in the stadium. But I got 4 tickets. And that was the day that I became a service person. My job was to serve other people. And some people made things, some people were in banking, some people were doing this or that, next thing. But I was a salesman and a service guy. And to this day, I'm very proud of serving people. So right after my first year of training, the boss said, we have 3 territories that are open. Now it's 1966, spring of 66. You can go to, we want you to run your own territory. You can go to Seattle, you can go to Dallas, or you can run New England. I said, I know which one I want. He said, no, take a week. I said, I don't need a week, I need a second. I'm taking New England. He said, how'd you make that decision so quickly? I said, because I'm getting married to a girl in New England in 6 or 8 weeks. It'll be a lot more convenient for me. So I ran the New England territory. As a young man, I was 25. I was covering 6 states and visiting car dealers and helping them understand the national advertising and their role in that and how we could help them with their local advertising, et cetera, et cetera. And after a year of that, now I'm on the job on Madison Avenue for 2 years. First in Madison Avenue and then in Boston. The boss called me in and he said, we're going to have a meeting in Detroit, I want you to come. So I go to Detroit. I've never been to Detroit, but it made sense. That was the headquarters of Chrysler Corporation. So I went to the meeting. Now I say to somebody, if there's a meeting, show me an agenda, and I'll get back to you whether I can make it or not. But when you're 25 or 26, you just say, I'll be there when, show me when. So at the meeting, they announced that, and by the way, all the field guys, I was what was called a field guy, all the field guys were from outside. They're all men. There were no women in the organization at that time. It was very backwards. So they said, Charlie's going to Los Angeles, Ed's going to Chicago, Jack here is going to Philadelphia. It's the biggest region in the country. He's our youngest guy, but because he's done such a great job in New England, we think he can earn it. And I can remember thinking, wow, Eileen's pregnant with a now 54-year-old son. But, you know, we get an apartment in Philadelphia. That's fine. We can come back every once in a while. The next phrase changed my life forever. The boss said on his feet, keeps his nose clean. By the time he's 30, he'll be a vice president right here in Detroit. I quit the next morning. I didn't have a resume. I didn't have a job. I didn't have an idea what I wanted to do, but I knew what I didn't want to do. I wanted to live in Boston, greater Boston. I was a homeboy before the phrase homeboy was created, because today we live in Brooklyn. We live right near the country club in Brooklyn. I live maybe 3.5 miles from the house I came home from the hospital to when I was born in Roslindale. I live less than 2 miles from the hospital where I was born. I live less than, well, about 7 miles from the house I grew up in Dedham. Eileen and I live maybe 3.5 miles from the house we raised our family in Newton by the top of Heartbreak Hill on Ward Street. And we've lived in the same house for 33 years in Brooklyn. So 33 years since Labor Day. So I have now quit my job. Just imagine her parents. She's pregnant with our first child, and her husband is unemployed. Just imagine how highly they must have thought of me at that point. And then 8 months later, I was, the boss at the BBDO in Baton Nursing Home in Boston took a liking to me, and he said, look, I want you to stay with us, even if you're going to quit. I want you to stay here. You're a good guy. So I appreciated that, but I knew that once you say no to the big stuff, it's time to move on. So they gave me 2 or 3 accounts to work on, and I tried to do a good job. And then 8 months later, 4 of us opened Hill Holiday Connors Cosmopolis, an agency we modestly named after ourselves. And unfortunately for me, everybody called it Hill Holiday. I never got any publicity.
You did okay.
My partners were 40, 35, 30. I was 25. In order to open your own agency, in order to open Hill Holiday, I had to kick in $1,500. There was a problem with that. I only had $500. So I had to borrow $1,000, and now I was an equal partner in the world's smallest advertising agency, which became one of the top 20 agencies in America. And if you've ever seen the Clydesdale horses for Budweiser, we used to do all that advertising. If you've ever seen American Runs on Dunkin', we created that. I was the president or the CEO or the chairman for about 36 years. I might have had 20 bad days in 36 years when we lost a big account or something, but I loved the business. And now, remember when I said I was a service guy? So everybody could do ads. Everybody could write a TV commercial, not everybody, but talented people, and there were plenty of talented. But because I was on the board of Boston College, hey Kev.
Yes. This is our son, Kevin.
So we started, and nobody cared. I called, there was a telephone strike, so we couldn't get a phone, so I would go to the bank and get a roll of dimes every morning. And I called from outside the office because there were no phones, you couldn't get a phone installed. Office was at 147 Newbury Street, a little tiny operation. So I go down, there was a payphone kind of near the corner. I called everybody I knew to tell them that I just started my own advertising agency with 3 friends. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. First year we did $37,000 in revenue. And by the time I left, we were, doing close to $300 or $400 million worth of advertising. And every bit of that growth came from trying to impress people. Like when you graduate from high school or college, they call it commencement. because it's the beginning. And it's a terrible word because you've been studying all these years and they call it the beginning. How come it's not the end? No, it's just another beginning. And so when I started, it was just another beginning. And there were a couple of things, because I was 25 when I helped start the company. I didn't know what I needed to know. I was a salesman. My partners were a writer, an art director, and a media person. They didn't know anything about business. So I found out the hard way, because we almost went out of business, that I had to become the business guy. And so I learned all about business management and finance, not all about it, but enough to help build the company. And so I was self-taught. And there was one man who I admired more than any other people in the advertising business. His name was Bill Bernbach. He was in New York City. And I met him one day. And a year later, after I met him, I was at another event with him, and he said, "Hi, Jack." I was blown away that I remembered little Jack Connors. So I asked him, I said, what's it going to take for people to be successful in your business, and if I may say so, my business? Same thing, but you're big, I'm small. He said, "Jack, I learned a long time ago that it's going to take two qualities. The first is that there's a lot of really smart people in the world, and you need smart people to build your agency, to be writers and art directors and creative people and media analysts and so on and so forth, and service people." He said, "And there's a lot of nice people in the world. There's more nice people than there are smart people. But the ones you want are both. The ones you want to hire are the ones who are smart and nice." And he said, "There's not many of those. There's a lot of each one, but there's very few that are both." And so all my professional life, I've done my best to surround myself and tried to be myself. I wasn't smart, but I was at least nice. And it's just amazing what you can accomplish if you're nice. We see it in politics. We see it in, we see bullies everywhere. It's a growth industry. But if you just set your example on your life and you be as smart as you can, study hard, but just being nice is easy. You just have to be thoughtful. You have to care about people. There was Eileen and I and our family are Catholics, and if you're at that school in Needham, there's a little of that in your lives too. But my favorite saint was St. Francis of Assisi, who lived in the 1500s. And Francis of Assisi was famous for a whole bunch of things, but two little stories. He said, words, deeds, not words. It's not what you say. It's how you act. It's how you live your life. It's your example. The other thing he said was, he had a young monk. They both left the abbey and they went into town in Assisi in Italy in the 1500s. And St. Francis said to him, he wasn't a saint then, but he said to the young monk, "Let's go to town and preach the gospel." And so they did. They went into town, they clothed the naked, they fed the hungry, they dressed, they visited the prisoners, they visited the sick, and all the corporal works of mercy, whatever. And late in the afternoon, Francis said to the young monk, let's go back to the monastery." And the young monk said, "Well, I thought we were going to preach the gospel." And he said, "We just did." It's how you live your life. So I got lucky. I was asked to join the board of Boston College. In fact, Gretchen's dad, I think, was the reason I got in front of the then president, J. Donald Moon. And and then eventually I wound up working on the board of a hospital, the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, inspired by the fact that my mother had been born in one block in front of what would eventually be the Longwood Hospital area in 1904. Two great things happened. They laid the cornerstone for Gordon Hall at Harvard Medical School on Longwood Avenue, and my mother and her twin brother were born. They would be the first of 3 sets of boy-girl twins, born in a tenement house to a midwife. And so I agreed to join the hospital board. So now I could do someone's advertising. I might be able to put a good word for them to get into a college, and I could take care of their mother at a hospital. So I was a service guy at the highest possible level, and got rewarded for that. Clients stayed with us longer. They paid us a premium, and we got to build this house, which Eileen and I have been in for 15 years. She wanted, in the worst way, to be right here. We were down the street about 8 houses. She wanted, there were 2 cabins here, and Eileen wanted to be here. And I said, oh my God, I could see the dollar signs. And we tore down the 2 cabins, built this house, opened a restaurant down the street called the Marside. Each of 3 youngest children have homes on this same street, and Eileen's only sibling has a home on the street. So we control the precinct here. You know, we can manage all the votes.
It's a strip mall.
So now, so now it's your turn. Who's going to ask the first? Who dares ask the first question?
So,
It doesn't have to be about what I said. It could be about anything you want to.
okay, so what made you start Hill Holiday at such a young age? Like, what was there anyone like who helped you do that?
No, it was, well, yeah, I shouldn't say no. When I was growing up, my dad, whose take-home pay at the end of 2 weeks was $200 after taxes, $100 a week take-home. He was an electrician, hard worker, good family man. He wanted, in the worst way, to open a hardware store. And my uncle, and he agreed to do so. I didn't know any of this till a few years later. And my uncle, who had a few bucks, agreed to do it. And then my uncle backed out. And so my father was kind of crestfallen that he wasn't able to break the cycle and open his own store. And I said to myself, I'm not going to let that happen to me. I'm going to do exactly what I want to do. I'm going to do it in hopefully a successful, thoughtful way. I know it means I'm going to have to work harder. I have a lot of friends who are smarter than I am, who are really good people, but none of them work as hard as I do. I'm 79 years old. I'm still working because I love what I do. Because today all I really do is help people, and that's why I'm here. That's what I'm supposed to do. And by the way, that's why I'm happy. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Carnes, you've always been mindful of education.
This is Jack, by the way. Mr. Thomas is my father.
You've always been mindful about education and have done so much for the schools in the Boston area. At what point in your life did you realize the importance of a good education?
Give me that last part again.
At what point in your life did you realize the importance of a good education?
Oh, a good education.
Great question. Great question. So, I like to think I'm colorblind. I don't care what color anyone is. I just want to know if they're nice and if they're smart. Or if they're not nice, could they be? But I'll tell you a story that comes from a book that I read 40 years ago by Leon Uris, who's a Jewish writer. And he never wrote any short books that I was aware of. They're all like this thick. And this book was called Trinity. It was about Ireland. And it told the story of how the English treated the Irish as if they were slave colony. They would not allow them to be educated. Now, this is not true anymore, but this in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, early 1900s. They treated Ireland as a slave colony. They would not allow, it was against the law to show anybody how to read a book. So it created words like hedgerow teachers that they hid in the corner of the hedgerow so no one would see them, and they had a book with a little dirt on it and so on. They taught people how to read. And in my interpretation of that is the English treated the Irish the way a lot of white people treat black people. And so being Irish, being proud to be Irish, and President Obama asked me to be the ambassador to Ireland, but I wanted to watch people like Gavin grow up, so I didn't want to go to Ireland for 4 years or a year. He said, bring him with you, but I said, no, I don't have that much sway with their parents. We have these schools in Dorchester and Brockton where poor kids go, and those kids are mostly brown and black. There's some white, but their parents' aspirations for their children in this great country called America were for their children to have a good education. And we now have a little over 1,500 boys and girls, and say K through 6, a little bit of 7 and 8. That, but for what we did, would be that's a garage door. The house isn't full. But for these schools, the schools would have been converted to condominiums, and those kids wouldn't get the same quality or the same education or the same love that they get. So I know, your parents know, that if you have an education, you have an opportunity to be successful. And if you don't have an education, your opportunities are a lot fewer. College graduates make a lot more money than high school graduates, just high school graduates. So if I had an education and I had some success in business, then it's my turn to give back. My turn to help others. I don't know these people. I've met some of them. They don't know me. My picture's not on any walls. There's no schools named after me. I just quietly went out and raised $100 million so that they could have a good education. And I'm very proud of it. Great question, thank you. Now it's your turn.
In 2007, you had an idea to create Camp Harborview.
Yeah.
Did you have, what was your motivation in creating Camp Harborview?
So, there's a phrase, accidental tourist. I'm an accidental success. There's a quote that's on a painting that I love. He did not plan. He merely let himself go, and the overwhelming spirit did the rest. It's only when youth is gone and experience gives us a sort of cheap courage that we understand how simple such things are. So, I think it was maybe Andy Warhol said 90% of life is showing up. Or maybe that was Groucho Marx, I don't know who it was. But I got a call one day from the mayor of Boston, Mayor Tom Menino, in 2006. And he said, come down to my office. It was almost like, in the Batman series, the signal goes out from Gotham City Hall that Batman, they need Batman at City Hall. So I went down to the Batcave, got in my car, put on my cape, of course, and went to City Hall. And I didn't have a cape on, my car wasn't in the garage. But I went down to City Hall, and I said, how can I help you? He said, the inner city kids in Dorchester, Mattapan, Roxbury, are not having the kind of summer that they deserve. In some cases, if they're outside, they're dodging bullets, and sometimes unsuccessful. 1 or 2 kids were getting picked off and killed every year. Or, in other cases, their parents not wanting them to get hurt, keeping them in their apartment all day. Imagine being in an apartment all day. So he said, I want you to come up with some kind of summer program for the playgrounds. I had no idea. Eileen's a social worker. I'm a peddler. I'm a salesman. I had no idea how to do anything like this. So I said, give me a couple of weeks, I'll come back to you. And this is where my faith comes in. When I was 8 years old, maybe I was 9, my mother and father took my sister and I from our home in Rosendale, 2-family house upstairs. We brought used blankets to a place in Squantum, off of Squantum, which is part of Quincy, a hospital for the poor, on an island. called Long Island in Boston Harbor. And you got there from a causeway to Moon Island, where there's a police pistol range and a fire training academy, then a rickety bridge, which has since been blown up, to this island. And we brought these blankets to the hospital. And I don't think there was a lot of warmth left in these blankets, but I remember seeing a field. Now, this is where my faith comes in. Let's say I was 8, maybe 9. When the mayor called, I was probably 64, 63. So I didn't tell the mayor anything. I just got in my car. I kind of figured out how to get to Squantum and so on. Went down the expressway, got off at Neponset, went out under the bridge under the expressway towards Wollaston Beach. Took a left at the Dunkin' Donuts, went out to Squantum. Now there's a guard gate. Well, I'm in a suit and I'm driving a Mercedes, so they knew I wasn't there to run with this. So I said to the guard, because they didn't want people wandering around the pistol range or the fire academy, I said, I want to make a donation to the homeless shelter that's out on Long Island. He said, okay. So I went out the causeway to Moon Island, past the police pistol range, which I hadn't remembered, past the fire academy, which I hadn't remembered, over the bridge, now past the Civil War cemetery where 78 Civil War soldiers are buried. It was a training camp during the Civil War, didn't know that. Past the hospital. Now I get to a sign that says, do not enter. All my life I've been going to 2 signs that say, do not enter. Because I wasn't supposed to do all the good things I've been able to do. So I lift up this horse, drove out on the dirt road, now I'm 4.5 miles out, and there's the field. There's the field that I remember when I was 8. So I quietly did a little homework. What is this? This has been here. It's empty. There's no building on it. There's nothing. There had been something because I saw some bricks along the side. So I did some little digging into history, a little what they call secondary research. Found out that it had been an army base called Fort Strong. During World War II, they strung mines and nets between Long Island and Deer Island, where you see the sewage treatment plant now, to prevent German warships or submarines from coming into Boston Harbor. So the mines were for the boats, the nets were for the submarines. And they would have blown up, but no German anything showed up. So after the war, it was consigned to the Department of Defense. They didn't need a fort there anymore. By the way, that would have been pretty good duty during World War II, as opposed to fighting in France or Italy or Japan or Hawaii. But so I called. I learned that the property had gone all the way through the federal government to the state government. Now the city owned this island. So I called the mayor and I said, I have an idea for you. I said, do you have any cars with blue lights? Oh, I got a lot of those, he said. So I said, good, pick me up. We're going for a ride. And I'm not going to tell you where we're going. So he came over, picked me up, went out the expressway, got off at Neponset, underneath the highway, out to Wollaston Beach, took a left at the Dunkin' Donuts, out to Squantum. He said, where the hell are you taking? What's going on? And he had his entourage with him, because big shots don't travel alone. So there's 2 cars. So the guard gate, it's the Boston Health Commission Police Department. They were not marathoners, okay? It was a bunch of wonderfully old, retired ex-cops who liked Dunkin' Donuts more than they liked training. So they salute the mayor. We go out, lift up the wooden horse, or the metal gate doing it. Well, now we're out in the field. He said, well, what are we doing here? I said, you own this property. And if you'll give me a 30-year lease for $1 a year, I'll raise $10 million, having no idea how to raise $10 million. And I'll build you a camp for inner city kids, having no idea how to do that. He said, you're crazy. Those were his words, you're crazy. I said, you called me. And we laughed, we shook hands, and I built them a summer camp. I promised that we'd raise $10 million. I went to 2 people, Joe Corcoran and Ted Kelly. Joe Corcoran ran Corcoran Mullins Jones or something, real estate. Ocean Edge. Ted Kelly was the CEO of Liberty Mutual. And I went to them and asked for $1 million each, and they gave it to me. And so far, we've raised $132 million. And every year, there's 1,000 kids. Maybe not 1,000 this year because of COVID, you gotta have greater separation. But for every year, we had 1,000 boys and girls from the inner city go there. And so, who am I? What do I do for a living? I help people. And I don't help rich people. I help people who need help. And that makes my heart happy, because really what I do is what Eileen did all her life. She was a social worker. She was a school teacher. And she helped people, and I help people. And there's a phrase by the Dalai Lama. And can I ask you a favor? Would you on my desk, there's a little card. If you were sitting at the computer, you'll see a little plasticized card. It's not even as big as a postcard. Would you get that? I want to quote it quick. Thank you, Ben.
8th grader at St. Sebastian's. Oh, going into the 8th grade.
Okay.
And for a girl, that's a good thing.
My first fun fact or question is, what's your favorite thing to do on the Cape?
Be with my grandchildren. Totally the favorite thing.
That's cool. Mine is probably to go to two specific beaches. One is in Centerville. It's called Craigville Beach, and I like to go with my cousins.
Craigville Beach is wonderful.
Yeah, and then I also like to go to Mayflower Beach in Dennis with my godfather and his wife.
Oh yeah, that's a big beach.
Yeah.
When you're over in Craigville, don't forget to stop at Four Seas and get an ice cream.
I love Four Seasons.
Me too.
Off those ice creams. And the candy stores.
You're next.
Should I just make questions? My favorite thing to do on the Cape is go golfing with my family.
Oh, golfing, good for you. You're like Gavin, if you learn young. I never learned young, so I'm a terrible golfer. I love golf, but I'm not good. Like I was at every other sport. I'm good. But I finally found my sport, life, business. So, what you want to ask me a question, or are you?
No,
Oh yes, I have a question, but
Okay, go for it.
so my question is, what's your favorite ice cream spot and flavor?
My favorite ice cream spot is in Dorchester Lower Mills. It's called the Ice Cream Smith. And the Millers have been there because it's not a half a mile from their home, or maybe a mile. And but I have a lot of favorites. One is Rancatories, which is in Belmont and Newtonville. Four Seas is very good. But the Smuggler up here is pretty damn good too. I like the Smuggler. And my favorite flavor? When I go to the Ice Cream Smith, it's chocolate. But I love black and white extra thick fraps, which may explain why I look like a lumberjack more than a man. Who's next? I think
Mine is what's next on your summer reading list, and like the current book you're reading now, and you can also like your favorite.
Give me that last part again.
The current book you're reading right now, and you can also say your favorite book.
So, the book I'm reading now has to do with racial equity. I, in my own quiet way, together with Eileen, we like to see a little more equality, and we don't like people that hate other people. Whether it's Nazis in Germany in World War II that hated Jews. I mean, they didn't even know them. How do you hate someone that you don't know? Or even if you know them, how do you hate someone for their religion being different than your religion? I don't understand hate, or at least I don't allow it. I actually hated the New York Yankees sometimes, but for the most part, there's no hate in my life. And then, so I'm reading this book on racial equity. My favorite book? Wow, I don't know. I'm a people reader more than a book reader. And Eileen beats me on books. I probably read 3 books a year, but she reads 3 books a month.
You read thousands of magazines and newspapers.
Yeah.
All the newspapers.
I'm a voracious reader, but I don't have a good recollection of what I read. So I don't do well with books because I read them and then I forget what I read. So I try and stay current. What's your favorite?
Well, my favorite book is Refugee.
Refugee.
Yeah, it's like it takes place with like 3 different characters at different time periods.
Wow.
But like, I really find that my favorite topic for like history is like World War II. I just
World
find
War
it
II.
really interesting.
Wow. Yeah. That was such an important war, and the United States got into it a little later than they should have. Then perhaps they should have, but when they got in big time, and they won in both places, in all places. And I worry sometimes that maybe we've lost our ability to care about other people as much as we used to. And I hope we don't have to go to war again. President Biden is, he's a friend. He said that I was his buddy. When I was asked by President Obama to become the ambassador to Ireland, he put Joe Biden, who was his vice president, on me. And Joe would call me and say, you gotta take this job. You're gonna love it. Where do you see the house? It's on 1,400 acres, the ambassador. And I said, Joe, just out of curiosity, Mr. Vice President, just out of curiosity, why do you want me to do this? He said, because it's our last term. I want to come over and play golf with you. That's not enough of a reason for me to change my life. So I'm proud that he, on occasion, calls me his buddy. We're not close friends or anything like that, but I'm an admirer. He's taking us out of Afghanistan. Now, we've had a lot of soldiers and Marines and so on, special forces die in Afghanistan. And he doesn't see a future. And he's saying that the future is up to the people of Afghanistan to figure out. We don't want to send more, what they used to call World War II cannon fodder. We don't want to send more people to die. And there's going to be a lot of criticism. Airplane magazines are terrible. But this one article caught my attention. It was a quote from the Dalai Lama. I do, but I'm okay. As long as your existence is meaningful to others, your own life has meaning. I really believe that my life has meaning. That, I believe, is the best preparation for the next life. That is also the source of a happy mind, which means a happy life. I never met the Dalai Lama, but I like what he had to say. So, next question. Sorry I'm going on and on here. I hope it's interesting. And I'm going to ask you a tough question. I'm going to start with you and then we're going to go right across. What was your favorite part?
My favorite part, it was when you were kind of sharing like life story of how you kind of like was creating your company and kind of like how you were like building up like in the way you described it. And you're really funny.
Thank you. How about you? What was your favorite?
My favorite part was probably also like telling your life story, but also like the quote by the Dalai Lama. I really like that.
Yeah, good.
I like the part where you were like also in your life story when you were talking about how you first met Eileen and she was 14 and you were 16, and then like
She was beautiful then and she's beautiful now.
and then people were like saying you were like crazy for doing that.
I stuck with it. I didn't mind being called a cradle robber because I was in love with her.